The sun was setting over the city skyline as a sleek, black Mercedes AMG GT cruised down the well-maintained streets of Pine Valley. Behind the wheel sat a man who carried himself with quiet confidence, a testament to his 15 years of dedicated service in the Marine Corps. His crisp blue suit and polished dress shoes reflected his current success as a cybersecurity consultant, but his eyes still held that unmistakable military discipline. Just that morning, he had stood in his driveway, keys in hand, admiring his new purchase. The car wasn't just any luxury vehicle. It represented every early morning, every missed holiday, and every challenging mission he'd undertaken. From dodging bullets in foreign lands to building his consulting business from scratch in his garage, each memory had led to this moment. "You did it, son," his father's words echoed in his mind. Those same words had encouraged him when he first enlisted, when he started his business, and now, as he achieved another milestone. His father, a retired postal worker who had taught him the value of hard work, would have been proud to see how far his son had come. The new car owner remembered the day he walked into the Mercedes dealership. The salesperson had initially directed him toward the less expensive models, making assumptions that still stung. But rather than getting angry, he had simply pulled up his portfolio on his phone, showcasing the cybersecurity firm he'd built from nothing into a company that now protected major corporations from digital threats. His new car wasn't just about luxury. It was about breaking barriers and showing others that dreams don't have limits. Every detail of the vehicle had been carefully chosen, from its precise German engineering to its cutting-edge security features. He'd researched for months, saved diligently, and made sure this investment aligned with his financial goals. The leather seats still had that new car smell, mixing with the subtle scent of the pine air freshener his young daughter had insisted on adding. "To make it smell like home, Dad," she'd said, referring to their house near the pine forests. Her small gesture had transformed this symbol of success into something more personal, more meaningful. As he drove home from his latest client meeting, he couldn't help but smile at how life had come full circle. The same determination that had gotten him through boot camp had helped him build his business. The discipline that made him an excellent Marine had made him an even better entrepreneur. Each challenge had been a stepping stone, each setback a lesson. The sun's rays caught the car's polished surface, creating a reflection that turned heads as he drove past the local coffee shop. He remembered the days when he could barely afford a cup of coffee, let alone a luxury car. Now he made it a point to regularly buy coffee for veterans at that same shop, never forgetting where he came from. The purr of the engine was interrupted by the flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. At first, he thought the police car was responding to an emergency and would pass by. But as the lights stayed steady behind him, a familiar knot formed in his stomach, one he felt too many times before when driving nice cars in certain neighborhoods. Despite his success, despite his service to his country, some things hadn't changed. Taking a deep breath, he signaled and pulled over, about to face a situation all too familiar to many successful professionals of color. Little did he know that this routine traffic stop would spark a chain of events that would not only challenge his patience and principles, but would also lead to changes that would ripple through the entire community. His military training had taught him to face challenges head-on, and that's exactly what he planned to do, with dignity, respect, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The police cruiser had been tailing him for the last 10 minutes, following his every turn through the quiet suburban streets. He kept checking his speedometer, steady at exactly the speed limit. His turn signals blinked faithfully at every corner, and his new Mercedes purred smoothly along the well-paved road. He thought back to the client meeting he'd just left, where he'd secured a major cybersecurity contract for a local bank. His presentation had been flawless, his expertise evident in every word. The bank's board members had nodded approvingly as he outlined his plans to protect their digital assets. It was moments like these that reminded him how far he'd come from his early days of fixing computers in his garage. Through his rearview mirror, He could see the police officer speaking into their radio. Years of military training had taught him to stay alert while remaining calm. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, keeping his hands at the textbook 10 and 2 position. The expensive watch on his wrist, a gift from his team after landing their first major corporate client, caught the afternoon sunlight. His daughter's school was just a few blocks away. He promised to pick her up early today to celebrate his new contract. They had plans to get ice cream at her favorite shop, the same one where he used to count coins to buy her a single scoop when he was just starting his business. Now he could afford to buy the whole shop if he wanted to, but he made sure to keep her grounded, teaching her the same values his parents had instilled in him. The police car's presence was making him increasingly uneasy. He'd been in similar situations before, but something felt different this time. The officer had plenty of opportunities to pass him or turn off onto another street, but they stayed right behind him, close enough that he could see the outline of their face in his mirror. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, probably asking about their mom's surprise birthday party next weekend. He'd been put in charge of the arrangements. The same guy who used to organize complex military operations was now planning the perfect celebration for the woman who'd supported his dreams from day one. The phone kept buzzing, but he knew better than to reach for it, especially with law enforcement following him. The streets in this neighborhood were lined with massive oak trees, their branches creating tunnels of shade. He remembered admiring these same streets years ago, promising himself that one day he'd live in a community like this. Now he owned a house just a few blocks away, earned through years of hard work and determination. His neighbors had been welcoming, for the most part, though some still did double takes when they saw him working in his front yard or washing his car in the driveway. The music playing softly through his car's premium speakers was interrupted by the sharp whoop of a police siren. His heart sank, but he wasn't surprised. Taking a deep breath, he checked his mirrors one last time before carefully pulling over to the right side of the road. The spot he chose was well lit, in clear view of several house security cameras, another habit from his years of experience. As he put the car in park, he could see several curious neighbors peeking through their windows. His military training kicked in automatically, back straight, hands visible, movements slow and deliberate. He reached for his wallet, making sure his military ID was right next to his driver's license. The Medal of Honor pin on his lapel caught the light, a reminder of his service and sacrifice for the very country where he now found himself in this situation. The approaching footsteps of the officer crunched on the gravel shoulder of the road. In his side mirror, he could see them walking with one hand resting on their holster, a sight that brought back memories of tense moments in far-off places. But this wasn't a war zone. This was his neighborhood, his home. As the officer's shadow fell across his car, he steeled himself for what was about to unfold, knowing that how he handled the next few minutes could have lasting consequences. The officer's flashlight beam swept across his face, unnecessarily bright in the daylight. License and registration, came the gruff command, skipping any form of greeting. The tone was familiar. He'd heard it before, that mix of suspicion and authority that made his chest tighten. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached for his documents. "Sir, my registration is in the glove compartment." "I'm going to reach over to get it now," he announced clearly, remembering his training from both the military and, unfortunately, from past experiences like this one. The leather of his seat creaked as he leaned over. "How long have you owned this vehicle?" the officer questioned, emphasizing this as if the Mercedes was somehow out of place with its owner. The question came before even looking at the registration that clearly showed the car was purchased just 2 weeks ago. He could feel his pulse quickening, but his voice remained steady as he replied, "I purchased it new from the dealership on Oak Street 2 weeks ago." The officer's eyes narrowed, scanning the immaculate interior of the car. "Step out of the vehicle," came the next command. A second patrol car pulled up behind the first, its lights also flashing. The quiet neighborhood street was now a scene of unwanted drama. with more curtains twitching as neighbors watched. As he stepped out, his polished dress shoes crunched on the gravel. His military bearing showed in his posture, straight-backed, dignified, non-threatening. The silver pin on his suit lapel caught the sunlight, a reminder of valor in combat that seemed to mean nothing in this moment. "Sir, may I ask why I was pulled over?" he inquired respectfully, though he already knew the unspoken reason. The response was predictable. "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area." The same line he'd heard before, in different neighborhoods, in different cities. The second officer approached, hand resting casually on their holster. "This is a pretty expensive car," they commented, walking around the Mercedes as if inspecting it for flaws. "What do you do for a living?" The question carried an undercurrent of disbelief, as if success and his appearance couldn't possibly go together. He took a deep breath, remembering his daughter's words from that morning. "Dad, you always tell me to stand up for what's right." His phone buzzed again in his pocket, probably the school wondering why he hadn't picked her up yet. The ice cream would have to wait. "I own a cybersecurity firm," he stated clearly, reaching slowly for his business card holder. "I'm also a retired Marine Corps veteran. I'd be happy to provide you with my business license and military ID." The cards were premium weight, embossed with his company logo. A business he built from nothing, through years of hard work and determination. The first officer barely glanced at the cards. "We're going to need to search your vehicle. We've had reports of drug trafficking in high-end cars in this area." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. A few neighbors had gathered at the edge of their driveways, phones raised, recording the scene. His military training had taught him to handle high-pressure situations, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield where the enemy was clear. This was his own community, where the threat came wrapped in a badge and preconceptions. "Sir, I respectfully decline consent to search my vehicle," he stated firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who knew his rights. "I have not committed any traffic violations, and you have not provided probable cause for a search. I'm currently late to pick up my daughter from school, and I'd like to know the specific reason for this stop." The officers exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such a composed and knowledgeable response. The atmosphere shifted subtly as he reached for his phone, saying clearly, "I'm going to call my attorney now, and I'd like to get his guidance on this situation." His finger hovered over the speed dial. His lawyer's number had been saved there for situations exactly like this one. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every parent who'd had to explain discrimination to their child, every professional who'd been judged by their appearance rather than their achievements, every veteran who'd served their country only to face suspicion at home. As he dialed the number, he knew this encounter would end differently than the others. The phone rang twice before his attorney answered. He kept the call on speaker, wanting everything to be transparent. "I'm currently being detained without cause," he explained calmly, his voice steady despite the tension. "The officers are requesting to search my vehicle without probable cause." The neighbors who had gathered were no longer trying to be subtle about their recording. One elderly couple, who had always waved at him on his morning jogs, stepped closer to their fence. The wife had her phone raised high, while her husband stood with arms crossed, shaking his head at the scene unfolding. His attorney's voice came through clearly. "Officers, I'd like to know the specific reason for stopping my client." The first officer shifted uncomfortably, aware that the situation was now being documented from multiple angles. The second officer had stopped circling the car and was speaking quietly into their radio. While waiting for a response, he thought about his daughter's school project from last week, a presentation about her hero. She had probably talked about her father, the veteran who now protected people in a different way, through his cybersecurity work. The memory strengthened his resolve to handle this situation the right way, to be the example she believed him to be. "We've had reports of stolen vehicles matching this description," the first officer finally stated. His attorney's response was quick. "Can you provide the specific details of these reports?" the date, time, and location of these alleged thefts. The silence that followed was telling. A third police car pulled up, this one without flashing lights. A higher-ranking officer stepped out, the sergeant, judging by the stripes on their uniform. The sergeant's arrival changed the energy of the scene immediately. The first two officers straightened up, their earlier aggression giving way to uncertainty. His attorney continued through the speaker. My client is a decorated veteran and successful business owner. He is now late to pick up his child from school due to this unwarranted detention. If there's no probable cause, he should be free to go. The words hung in the air, clear and uncompromising. The sergeant approached, taking in the scene, the gleaming Mercedes, the professional in his tailored suit, the military pin, the watching neighbors, and the phones recording everything. What seems to be the issue here? The sergeant asked, their tone markedly different from the other officers. He remained calm as he explained the situation, his military bearing evident in his precise, respectful delivery. I was pulled over without any traffic violation. The officers have not provided a valid reason for the stop, but are insisting on searching my vehicle. I've presented my license, registration, military ID, and business credentials. The afternoon sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the street. A school bus drove past, reminding him again of his daughter waiting at her school. His phone buzzed with another message, the school's third attempt to reach him. The weight of the situation, the familiar frustration of having to prove himself yet again, pressed against his chest. The sergeant turned to the first officer, asking in a low voice about the supposed stolen vehicle reports. The officer's mumbled response confirmed what everyone already knew. There had been no such reports. The sergeant's face tightened with barely concealed frustration. Sir, the sergeant addressed him directly. You're free to go. We apologize for the delay. But he didn't move toward his car immediately. This moment was too important to let pass. His attorney was still on the line, listening intently. I appreciate that, Sergeant, he replied, his voice firm but professional. However, I'd like to formally report this incident. These officers' actions weren't just an inconvenience. They were a violation of my civil rights. I'd like your badge numbers, and I'll need a copy of the dash cam footage for my attorney. The watching neighbors had grown quiet, but their phones were still recording. The first officer's earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable realization that this routine stop, likely one of many similar stops they'd made, was about to have serious consequences. This wasn't about revenge or retaliation. It was about accountability, about making sure the next person who looked like him, drove a nice car, or lived in an upscale neighborhood wouldn't have to go through the same experience. As he stood there, waiting for the sergeant's response, he thought about his daughter again. Today's ice cream trip would come with an important lesson about standing up for what's right. His calm request for badge numbers and dash cam footage created a ripple of tension in the air. The sergeant pulled out a notepad, handling the situation with the professionalism that should have been present from the start. I understand your concerns, sir, the sergeant said, their tone measured and serious. I'll provide you with everything you need for your report. The elderly neighbor who had been recording stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet street. I've got it all on video, dear, every single minute of it. She held up her phone, her hands slightly shaking, but her voice strong. Been living here 30 years, and I've never seen such a shameful display of, well, you know what this is. His attorney was still on speakerphone, documenting every word. Make sure to get the incident number, the attorney reminded him. We'll need it for the formal complaint. The first two officers stood uncomfortably, their earlier authority deflated by the growing realization of their mistake. A young couple walking their dog passed by, slowing down to witness the scene. They were new to the neighborhood. He remembered helping them jump-start their car just last week when their battery died. The woman gave him a sympathetic smile, while her partner nodded in silent support. The sergeant finished writing, and tore off several pages from their notepad. Here are the badge numbers, the incident number, and my direct contact information, they said, handing over the paper. The dash cam footage will be preserved. I'll personally make sure of that. There was a hint of something in the surgeon's voice, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps concern about what would follow. His phone buzzed again, the school calling for the fourth time. I need to pick up my daughter, he stated, his voice carrying the weight of a father's responsibility. She's been waiting for over an hour now. The mention of his daughter seemed to hit home with the officers, humanizing a situation they had approached with unwarranted suspicion. As he prepared to leave, he turned to address all three officers. I served this country for 15 years, he said, touching the pin on his lapel. I've protected American lives and interests abroad. Now I protect American businesses from cyber threats. All I ask is to be treated with the same respect I've shown in serving this country. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Some of the neighbors quietly applauded. The first officer, who had initiated the stop, couldn't meet his gaze. The second officer stared at the ground, shifting uncomfortably. Only the sergeant maintained eye contact, nodding slowly in acknowledgement. His attorney spoke up one final time. We'll be filing a formal complaint tomorrow morning. Expect contact from our office. The call ended, leaving the moment of profound silence, broken only by the distant sound of children playing in someone's backyard. As he walked back to his car, the elderly neighbor called out, "We'll all be witnesses if you need us, dear. This shouldn't happen to anyone, especially not in our neighborhood." Her husband nodded firmly in agreement, still recording the scene. The Mercedes door opened with that solid, expensive sound that had probably triggered the officer's suspicions in the first place. Before getting in, he paused and looked back at the assembled group, the officers, the neighbors, the young couple with their dog. This moment wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been judged unfairly, every parent who had to explain discrimination to their child, every veteran who came home to face battles they never expected. Starting the engine, he caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. His father's words from years ago echoed in his mind. "Son, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand your ground with dignity." Today, he had done exactly that. As he pulled away from the curb, he saw the sergeant addressing the other officers, their faces serious and attentive. His next stop would be his daughter's school, where he would have to explain why he was late. It would be a difficult conversation, but an important one. Sometimes the best lessons about justice, dignity, and standing up for what's right come from life's most challenging moments. The next morning, he sat in his home office, surrounded by the gentle hum of multiple computer screens. His daughter's drawing of a superhero, her version of him in his military uniform, hung prominently on the wall. The events from yesterday still weighed heavily on his mind as he reviewed the video footage his neighbors had sent overnight. His phone buzzed with a message from the elderly neighbor. "Channel 5 News wants to talk to us about what happened. I told them they should speak to you first." More messages followed, other neighbors offering their recordings, written statements, and support. The community's response had been overwhelming and unexpected. The local civil rights organization had already set up a meeting for later that afternoon. His attorney had been busy too, preparing a detailed complaint that went beyond just yesterday's incident. They had uncovered a pattern of similar stops in the area, all involving successful professionals of color driving high-end vehicles. His daughter peeked into his office, ready for school in her uniform. "Dad, are you still going to talk to my class about your cybersecurity work next week?" she asked. The question made him pause. Yesterday's incident had shaken her, but instead of fear, it had sparked curiosity and determination. During their delayed ice cream trip, she had asked thoughtful questions about justice and standing up for what's right. "Of course I am, sweetheart," he replied, managing a warm smile. "Now more than ever, it's important to show up and share our stories." She beamed at him before heading off to catch her school bus, her backpack bouncing with each step. Her resilience amazed him, just like her mother's had before cancer took her 3 years ago. His computer pinged with an incoming video call from the police department's Internal Affairs Division. They wanted to start the investigation immediately. The sergeant from yesterday had apparently filed their own report, one that didn't match the original officer's version of events. The dash cam footage had been secured, along with body camera recordings. As he prepared for the call, he glanced at the morning news on one of his screens. The incident had made the local headlines. Decorated veteran racially profiled in upscale neighborhood. His phone had been buzzing nonstop with calls from other news outlets, but he wanted to handle this the right way, not for publicity, but for change. The police chief's office had left 3 messages since dawn. The latest one mentioned wanting to discuss department-wide training opportunities and community relations improvement. It was a start, but he knew from experience that real change required more than just promises and training sessions. His attorney sent over more documents to review. Statements from other residents who had witnessed similar incidents in the past but had been afraid to speak up. The pattern was clear, and now they had the evidence to prove it. This wasn't about one bad experience. It was about systemic issues that needed addressing. A notification popped up on his screen. Another neighbor had sent security camera footage from their doorbell camera. This one showed the police cars following his Mercedes long before the stop, proving there had been no traffic violation. Each piece of evidence strengthened their case. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out his old military medals, including the one that matched the pin he'd worn yesterday. 15 years of service, multiple combat deployments, and countless missions defending American values, yet here he was, fighting a different kind of battle on the very streets he'd sworn to protect. A new email arrived from a police reform advocacy group. They wanted him to speak at their next community meeting about his experience. The message reminded him of something his commanding officer once said: "Sometimes the most important battles are fought with words and wisdom, not weapons." As he prepared for his video call with Internal Affairs, he straightened his tie and took a deep breath. Yesterday's incident had been difficult, but it had also created an opportunity, a chance to make real changes in how law enforcement interacted with the community. His military training had taught him that leadership sometimes meant taking a stand, even when it was uncomfortable. The morning sun streamed through his office window, catching the frame of his daughter's superhero drawing. In her young mind, he was still a hero. And today, he would continue to prove her right, not by fighting, but by working to create the change their community needed. The meeting room at the police department was smaller than he expected. Sitting across from the Internal Affairs investigators, he maintained the same calm demeanor that had served him well during countless military briefings. His attorney sat beside him, while a community liaison officer took notes in the corner. "Let's review the footage again," the lead investigator said, pressing play on the large screen. The dash cam video played silently, showing his Mercedes being followed for nearly 15 minutes before the stop. His attorney pointed out how the patrol car had passed several other high-end vehicles without stopping them. The body camera footage came next, revealing every word of the interaction. The elderly neighbor's video played alongside it, providing a different angle that clearly showed the officer's aggressive stance and unnecessary show of force. The lead investigator paused the video several times, taking detailed notes. "We've received similar complaints before." The community liaison officer suddenly spoke up, their voice quiet but firm. "But this is the first time we've had such clear documentation." The officer looked tired, as if carrying the weight of too many similar stories. His phone vibrated in his pocket, another message from the local news station. They'd been camping outside his cybersecurity firm all morning, hoping for an interview. But he knew this wasn't about getting his face on television. It was about creating real, lasting change. The investigator pulled out a thick folder. "We've reviewed the officer's stop records for the past year," they said, spreading papers across the table. The patterns were impossible to ignore. The data showed a clear bias in who they chose to pull over, question, and search. His attorney pointed to specific incidents that matched his case: successful professionals, expensive cars, no traffic violations. The numbers told a story that couldn't be explained away by coincidence or standard procedure. The community liaison officer's shoulders slumped slightly. They had seen this pattern before, but never had enough evidence to act. Outside the window, he could see protesters gathering peacefully in front of the police station. Some held signs supporting law enforcement, others demanding change. His daughter's school friend's parent was among them, the same person who had helped organize the Neighborhood Watch program last summer. His thoughts drifted to yesterday's conversation with his daughter over ice cream. "Dad, why do they think you did something wrong just because of your car?" she had asked. The question had struck him hard. How do you explain systemic bias to a child while maintaining her faith in justice? The lead investigator cleared their throat, bringing his attention back to the meeting. The officers involved had been placed on administrative leave, they announced. But we want to do more than just disciplinary action. We need to address the root causes. His attorney pulled out a proposal they had prepared: a comprehensive plan for department-wide reform. It included better training, community oversight, and regular audits of traffic stops. The community liaison officer leaned forward, clearly interested. "I'm not here for revenge," he stated clearly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led troops in combat. "I'm here because this needs to stop. Not just for me, but for everyone who comes after me." The investigators exchanged glances, perhaps surprised by his measured approach. His phone buzzed again. This time, a message from his daughter's teacher. The class was learning about civic responsibility, and they wanted him to speak about his experience. Even this difficult situation had become a teaching opportunity. The community liaison officer spoke up again. "We need people like you, veterans, business leaders, community members, to help us build better relationships." The sincerity in their voice was unmistakable. "Would you consider joining our community advisory board?" Before he could respond, his attorney pulled out another set of documents: more incidents, more stories from community members who had finally found the courage to come forward. Each page represented someone who had faced similar treatment but hadn't had the resources or support to fight back. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meeting room table. They had been there for hours, but it felt like they were finally making progress. Real change wouldn't happen overnight, but the foundation was being laid. As he reviewed the proposed reforms, he thought about his father's words. Sometimes the biggest changes start with one person willing to stand up. The weeks following the incident brought changes nobody had expected. One morning, as he sat in his favorite coffee shop working on his laptop, a young officer approached his table. It was one of the officers from that day, but this time in plain clothes, off duty. The officer's hands were shaking slightly as they asked if they could talk. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," the officer said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I joined the force to help people, but somewhere along the way," their voice trailed off, heavy with realization. The coffee shop's usual morning bustle continued around them, creating a strange bubble of privacy in the public space. His cybersecurity firm had become unexpectedly busy too. Other business owners who had faced similar experiences started reaching out, not just for security services, but for advice on how to handle discrimination. His waiting room often filled with people sharing their stories, finding strength in numbers and shared experiences. The local police department had begun implementing changes. Body camera footage was now automatically reviewed for all traffic stops. The elderly neighbor who had recorded the incident had been invited to join the Civilian Oversight Committee. Her first act was to propose a community feedback system that would track patterns in police interactions. His daughter's school presentation had turned into something bigger. What started as a simple talk about cybersecurity had evolved into a series of discussions about civil rights, respect, and standing up for what's right. The students asked tough questions, showing a wisdom beyond their years. The police chief had personally visited his office, not for publicity, but for a real conversation about change. They spent hours discussing how to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. "We need to rebuild trust," the chief had said, "and it starts with acknowledging our mistakes." Local business leaders began reaching out. A car dealership owner shared how he had witnessed similar profiling at his showroom. Together, they started planning workshops to address unconscious bias in customer service. The ripple effects were spreading beyond just law enforcement. His attorney called with updates almost daily. Other cases were coming to light, but now they were being handled differently. The department was taking proactive steps, reviewing past incidents, and making real changes to their training and procedures. His case had become a catalyst for department-wide reform. The community response continued to grow. People would stop him at the grocery store, sharing their own stories or simply expressing support. A group of veterans organized a meeting with police leadership, bringing their unique perspective on service, respect, and protecting community values. One afternoon, while washing his Mercedes in the driveway, the same car that had triggered the incident, a patrol car slowed down. His muscles tensed automatically, but the officer simply waved and continued driving. It was a small moment, but it represented progress. His daughter noticed these changes too. "Dad," she said one evening while doing homework, "my friend's dad is a police officer, and he said you helped make things better for everyone." The pride in her voice made all the difficult meetings and long hours worth it. The internal affairs investigation had expanded beyond just that one incident. They were now reviewing years of traffic stop data, looking for patterns that had been ignored for too long. The results were uncomfortable but necessary for real change. Community meetings that once drew only a handful of people now filled the local community center. People from all walks of life came together to share experiences and suggest solutions. The conversations weren't always easy, but they were always respectful and focused on progress. The young officer who had approached him in the coffee shop had become an unexpected ally. They started working with new recruits, sharing their experience and the lessons learned. "We need to see the person, not just the car they're driving," became their message to fellow officers. As he sat in his office reviewing the latest progress report, he noticed a new email from the police department. They wanted him to help develop a training program, combining his military leadership experience with his perspective as a community member. Real change was happening, one step at a time. 6 months after that fateful traffic stop, he stood at a podium in the city council chambers. The room was packed with faces both familiar and new: police officers, community members, local leaders, and even a few national civil rights representatives. His daughter sat in the front row, beaming with pride as he prepared to speak. "Change doesn't come from anger," he began, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "It comes from understanding, from willingness to listen, and from the courage to stand up for what's right." The microphone picked up his clear, steady tone, carrying his words to every corner of the chamber. The statistics displayed on the screen behind him told a powerful story. Traffic stops in the community had decreased by 40%, while positive police-community interactions had increased significantly. The Civilian Oversight Committee, now including members from all walks of life, had become a model for other cities. His eyes met those of the elderly neighbor who had recorded the incident. She sat with her husband, both now regular attendees at community police meetings. Their simple act of recording that day had sparked a movement that nobody had expected. She gave him an encouraging nod as he continued. "We've created something unique here," he continued, gesturing to the diverse crowd. "A partnership between law enforcement and the community that goes beyond just policies and procedures." The former officer who had stopped him that day was now leading sensitivity training sessions, using their own experience to teach others. His cybersecurity firm had grown too, but in an unexpected way. They now offered free digital security workshops for community organizations, teaching people how to protect themselves while building bridges between different parts of the community. The conference room that once hosted tense meetings now held weekly community gatherings. Looking at his daughter, he remembered their conversation from 6 months ago. "Dad, why did this have to happen to us?" she had asked. Now she understood. It hadn't happened to them. It had happened for them. For everyone who needed a voice, who needed change. The police chief stood up next, presenting the department's new comprehensive reform program. Body cameras were now standard, with footage regularly reviewed by the Civilian Oversight Committee. Traffic stop data was publicly available, ensuring transparency and accountability. His attorney sat quietly in the back, smiling slightly. What had started as a single case had grown into a movement for change. Other communities were reaching out, asking how they could implement similar reforms. The ripple effect continued to spread. A group of veterans in uniform stood along the wall, members of the new Community Advisory Board. They brought their unique perspective on service, duty, and protecting the rights they had fought to defend. Their presence reminded everyone that positive change could come from unexpected places. "This isn't the end," he said, nearing the conclusion of his speech. "It's just the beginning." He outlined the next phase of their community initiative, a scholarship program for young people interested in law enforcement careers, funded by local businesses and community members. His daughter's drawing of him as a superhero had been turned into the program's logo, a symbol of protection, justice, and positive change. The simple artwork captured everything they were working toward, a future where everyone could feel safe and respected in their own community. As he stepped away from the podium, the applause wasn't just for him. It was for every person who had contributed to the change. The neighbors who spoke up, the officers who listened, the community members who got involved, and even his daughter, whose innocent questions had helped guide their approach. The afternoon sun streamed through the chamber's windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, life in the community continued, people driving their cars, walking their dogs, living their lives. But something was different now. The air felt lighter, the interactions more genuine, the sense of community stronger. His Mercedes still turned heads when he drove through the neighborhood, but now for a different reason. It had become a symbol of positive change, a reminder that one incident, handled with dignity and determination, could transform an entire community. As he walked back to his seat, his daughter hugged him tightly, whispering, "You really are my superhero, Dad."